The scent of scorched metal drifted through the fog-choked outskirts of Nexus City, mixing with the tang of oil and ozone that never quite left the junkyard air. Towers of discarded alien machinery loomed like rusting skeletons, their jagged shapes forming a maze only the desperate dared to traverse. Among them moved Elias, a boy of 5 with eyes far older than his dirt-streaked face suggested. His tattered brown-gray sweater hung loosely on his small frame, sleeves frayed and stiff with grease, but he carried himself with the quick, practiced steps of one who had learned to survive where most would not. Each hand was calloused from rummaging through sharp metal edges, fingers deft as they picked over heaps of forgotten tech, searching for anything tradable. A squeaky satchel bounced against his hip, half filled with scavenged power cells currency enough, he hoped, for food tonight. The fog rolled thicker as the sun dipped behind Nexus's towering spires in the distance, the glow of the city like a world apart gleaming, unreachable. Elias pulled his sweater tighter around his thin shoulders. He should have turned back, but the junkyard held him like it always did, the promise of one more find, one more chance at survival. Then he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as shifting metal, a groan carried low on the wind. His whole body froze. Instinct screamed danger. The outskirts were filled with predators, some with claws, others with contracts. A human child alone was nothing but prey. And yet the sound came again, weaker this time, unmistakably alive. Against his better judgment, Elias crept toward it, weaving through toppled hulls and rusting conduits until he stumbled on a fresh scar in the ground. Metal still smoking from impact dot, at the center of twisted wreckage lay a figure half buried beneath shards of plating. Blue-skinned, tall, robes torn and smoldering, golden embroidery glinting faintly in the dim light. Elias's heart hammered. Even at 5, he knew what those markings meant. Someone important. Someone whose life was worth more than a scavenger's. His first thought was to run, to leave the elder to whatever fate the junkyard decreed. But as he edged closer, he saw the shallow rise and fall of the man's chest, the blood trickling from a head wound, the strained rattle of breath. Elias swallowed hard. If mercenaries came looking, they'd find this alien soon. And maybe they'd find him too. But the memory of his parents flickered through his mind, his father teaching him how to filter water with sand and charcoal, his mother's soft voice telling him to help, always help. He cursed under his breath, a word he'd picked up from older scavengers, and began to drag jagged debris away from the alien's body. It took nearly an hour. His small arms trembled from effort, his sweater torn anew as he pulled piece after piece aside, until at last the alien's massive frame was freed. The man was impossibly heavy, 7 feet if he was an inch, limbs limp as Elias hooked his hands under torn robes and hauled with everything in his little body. His cart squealed in protest as Elias levered the alien onto it, mismatched wheels shuddering under the load. "You better be worth this," Elias muttered, teeth gritted as he pulled the handle, muscles burning. The fog thickened as night fell, cold seeping into his bones, breath turning to mist with each straining step. The path back to his shelter, a repurposed shipping container, hidden in the maze of scrap, had never felt longer. Inside the container, warmth was relative, but it was his. Scraps of fabric had been stitched into bedding, water collected in cracked containers glistened faintly, and a salvaged power converter hummed weakly, giving just enough light to keep the shadows at bay. With a final grunt, Elias rolled the alien onto his only bed, stepping back to catch his breath. Up close, the robes were even more intricate, real gold woven with strange materials that spoke of wealth beyond imagining. Elias studied the man's face, long, dignified features, slack with unconsciousness, but not without presence. "Who are you?" Elias whispered, though no answer came. Carefully, Clumsily, he dabbed at cuts with scraps of cloth, binding what he could, and finally pulled his one blanket over the alien's form. The cold bit hard without it. Elias curled in the corner, wrapping his arms around his knees, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of the stranger's chest. He could have left him, should have left him, but something in him refused to let a living being die alone in the fog. "Don't die," he said firmly, voice small but steady. "I didn't drag you all this way for nothing." And for the first time that night, the alien's breathing eased, deeper, steadier. Elias rested his head against the cold wall, eyelids heavy despite the hunger gnawing at his belly. He had given up his bed, his blanket, and maybe his safety, but he had chosen compassion over calculation. As the boy drifted into uneasy sleep, he couldn't know that this act would ripple outward, changing not just his own life, but the fate of worlds. Tonight, he was just a lonely child in a junkyard, clinging to the warmth of a choice that made no sense, and yet felt utterly right. Elias woke to the faint hum of the converter, and the glow of dim light seeping through cracks in the shipping container. His small body ached from the cold metal floor, and his arms clutched his knees tightly as though he could squeeze warmth out of himself. For a moment, he forgot the events of the night until a low, rasping sound reached him. The alien on his cot stirred, a groan rising in his throat as his amber eyes fluttered open, vertical pupils narrowing against the light. Elias sat up quickly, his heart hammering in his chest. The man shifted with slow precision, trying to push himself upright despite the pain. "Where am I?" The alien's voice was deep, resonant, carrying an authority that filled the small space. Elias hesitated, then lifted his chin with the stubborn pride that was his armor. "You're in my shelter. I found you in the junkyard. You crashed." The alien studied him for a long moment, gaze sharp even in weakness. His hand brushed instinctively at a pocket in his torn robes, then froze, realization flickering in his expression. "My communicator," he muttered, and his face hardened. Elias, used to suspicion, shrugged as he pulled a dented cup of water from his filter rig. "If you had anything valuable, it's gone. Scavengers strip crash sites in minutes. You're lucky I found you first." He held out the cup. "It's clean. Charcoal and sand." The alien regarded the offering with a strange intensity, then accepted it with deliberate care. He drank, and his expression shifted from wariness to something softer, surprised. "You know filtration?" "My dad taught me before." Before he disappeared, Elias said quickly, busying himself with checking the man's wounds. "Your head's better. You heal fast." The alien's lips curved, the ghost of a smile. "My kind does. You are resourceful for one so young. What is your name?" "Elias," he answered after a pause. "And you?" The alien straightened, his bearing regal despite his ragged state. "I am Thorn the Oars." He watched the boy carefully, perhaps expecting shock or reverence. Elias only frowned. "Never heard of you. Can you eat human food?" "I've got protein bars." Thorn let out a low chuckle that turned into a cough. "Yes, that will do." Elias broke the bar in half, handing over the larger piece without thinking. He devoured his own share in 3 bites, hunger overwhelming caution. Thorn chewed thoughtfully, then asked, "Why help me? What do you hope to gain?" Elias froze, hands tightening on the fraying thread of his sweater. "Maybe I wanted your fancy robe," he muttered. "Or maybe I just didn't want you to die." For a long moment, silence filled the container, broken only by the hum of the converter. Then Thorn inclined his head. "Remarkable. In all my travels, I have seen compassion with calculation rarely without." Before Elias could reply, a sound outside made his stomach clench. Engines, low and predatory, cutting through the fog. His head snapped toward the door, instinct screaming. He crept to the crack and peered out, breath shallow. A black vessel hovered just beyond the heaps of scrap, sleek and silent, its insignia painted in crimson slashes. 4 tall figures disembarked, reptilian, their scaled skin gleaming under pale lights. Energy weapons hummed in their claws. "Saurians," Elias whispered, heart pounding. He darted back to Thorin, urgency sharp in his voice. "They're looking for you." Thorin's expression darkened, jaw tight. "Mercenaries. My enemies send their claws quickly." Elias's chest tightened. He had risked everything, and now danger had found him anyway. "We can't stay here," he said. Thorin struggled to rise, wincing but steadying himself with surprising strength. "Then we do not." Elias pulled his satchel over his shoulder, mind racing. He knew the labyrinth of junk better than anyone. He knew where to hide, where the tunnels cut deepest. But bringing an injured alien elder, heavy and conspicuous, was a gamble that could cost him everything. Yet he looked at Thorin's eyes, at the strange trust there, and made his choice. "Stay low. Follow me." He slipped out the back of the container, pressing himself against rusted hulls, ears tuned to the predators prowling nearby. Thorin moved behind him, surprisingly silent for his size. The fog wrapped around them, thick and ghostly, muting the searchlights that cut across the piles. Elias guided him through narrow corridors, only he could find, heart thundering in his chest. He didn't know why he was risking his life for this stranger, only that turning away now would betray something deep inside him. And as they disappeared into the maze, the first sparks of an unlikely bond flickered to life, one that would carry them far beyond the junkyard. The fog thinned as Elias guided Thorin deeper into the rusting labyrinth. Every step a gamble between stealth and speed. The air tasted of iron and burned wiring, and Elias's lungs ached from the pace, but he pressed on with a determination that belied his small frame. Thorin followed with the rigid poise of someone used to command, though each stride betrayed the stiffness of his injuries. At last they reached a clearing where towers of scrap gave way to a squat dome half buried beneath rust and grime, its white surface long since stained and forgotten. A cracked emblem of Nexus City's communications authority still clung to the entrance like a ghost of relevance. Elias slowed, lifting his hand in warning. "This is it. Old relay station. Most people don't know it's here." Thorin studied the dome with sharp amber eyes, lips tightening. "You discovered this on your own?" Elias nodded, a flash of pride softening his features. "Sometimes it still works if you know how to kick it right." The words were barely out when the low hum of engines stirred the air again. Shadows shifted across the fog as the mercenaries drew near, their guttural voices rasping commands. Elias's heart seized, and without hesitation he pressed Thorin back against the station's wall. "Stay here," he hissed. Thorin's hand shot out, gripping the boy's arm with surprising strength. "Absolutely not. You are but a child. They will kill you." Elias pulled free, eyes blazing with the stubbornness of someone who had never known protection. "This is my yard. I know how it moves. Trust me." Before Thorin could protest, the boy darted into the shadows, vanishing between heaps of broken plating. The mercenaries fanned out, reptilian silhouettes cutting through the mist, weapons pulsing faintly with blue energy. Elias moved with the silence of someone who had spent his life avoiding notice. He circled behind them, finding a tower of precariously balanced scrap that loomed above their path. With quick hands, he tugged free a crucial beam. The mountain groaned, metal shrieking as gravity claimed its due. Shouts split the night, ambush, as the pile collapsed in a cascade of screeching steel. The mercenaries scattered, curses hissing through their jagged teeth. Elias darted back to Thorin, face pale, but eyes alight with adrenaline. Now! Together they scrambled into the station as the mercenaries regrouped, fury burning in their guttural orders. Inside, dust swirled thick in the stale air, the room filled with banks of Kenzels, long dead, and wires dangling like cobwebs. The smell of mildew and electrical rot pressed close. Elias sprinted to the main terminal, his fingers flying over controls as though they were part of him. Power still on the grid. They never cut it properly. Lights sputtered to life, bathing the chamber in a weak blue glow. Thorin loomed behind him, voice low and urgent. "We must contact my security chief. Frequency 793 Alpha." Elias keyed in the sequence, a console groaning under the strain, a progress bar crawling across the cracked screen. A sharp impact rattled the door. Another, louder, sending dust from the ceiling. The mercenaries were cutting through with energy torches, the edges of the door glowing red-hot. Elias's small hands trembled as he rerouted connections under the console, sparks biting at his skin. The screen flickered, then steadied static clearing to reveal a distorted voice. "Identify requesting." Thorin leaned close, speaking with authority that seemed to anchor the room. "Kalen, this is Thorin Vayorars. Authorization code Indigo Star 7. I require immediate extraction. Sector 9 outskirts, Relay Station 12B. Hostiles present." The voice crackled back, faint but clear enough. "Confirmed. 20 minutes. Hold position." Elias's stomach dropped. 20 minutes? That door won't last 5. Another blow rang out, metal buckling. For the first time, fear plain showed in his wide blue eyes. Thorin set a hand on his shoulder, steady despite the thunder outside. "And we make another way." He drew from within his torn robes a slim metallic cylinder, pressing a hidden stud. With a resonant hum, it extended into a staff wreathed in energy, light rippling along its length. Elias stared in awe. You fight?" Thorin's lips curved into a grim smile. "I wasn't always a diplomat." The door shrieked as it began to give way, molten edges dripping onto the floor. Beyond, guttural voices roared, mercenaries preparing to pour through. Thorin raised his staff, stance calm and precise. "Stay behind me." Elias pressed his back to the console, heart hammering, his mind torn between terror and a strange, fierce pride. The boy who had spent his life scavenging in shadows now found himself beside a warrior, defending not just survival, but something larger, though he could not yet name it. The first cut widened, sparks flying, and the night howled as destiny forced its way into the room. The door finally gave way with a deafening crack, molten edges tearing apart as 4 Saurian mercenaries stormed into the relay station, their scaled bodies gleaming under the weak blue glow of the consoles. Their weapons pulsed, blue light casting predatory shadows against the walls. Elias shrank instinctively back against the console, every instinct screaming at him to hide, to vanish into the scrap like he always had. But there was nowhere left to run. Thorin Vayorars stepped forward instead, his posture unbowed despite the lines of exhaustion etched deep into his face. The energy staff hummed in his hands, a weapon and symbol both. With fluid grace, he met the first volley of fire. Sparks lit the chamber as bolts ricocheted against the staff's energy field, each deflection sending a shockwave of sound through the cramped space. Elias could only stare, frozen between fear and awe. This alien he had dragged out of wreckage, who had looked so broken and frail in his cot, now moved with the precision of someone who had lived war before diplomacy. The mercenaries snarled and fanned out, trying to flank him, but Thorin advanced. Every strike of the staff measured, every step anchored. He struck one Saurian in the chest, sending the reptile crashing into a console, then spun to sweep another's legs from under him. His blows did not kill. Elias realized it with a kind of shock. Each movement incapacitated, disarmed, but left life intact. This was control. This was power with restraint. The boy's chest tightened with something unfamiliar admiration. A mercenary lunged with a humming vibroblade, teeth bared, and Thorin met him in close quarters, parrying in a shower of sparks. With a twist, he disarmed the blade and shoved the attacker sprawling across the floor. The last hesitated, then fired wildly, bolts searing into the wall. Thorin's staff blurred, scattering them, and with a final strike, the room fell silent, except for the hum of the staff and the rasp of Elias's breath. "Are you hurt?" Thorin asked without looking back. Elias shook his head, though his knees trembled. "Not me," he whispered. "You." Thorin deactivated the staff, its light vanishing into silence, and leaned heavily against the console, sweat gleaming on his skin. "I've faced worse. We must move. More will come." As if on cue, distant shouts echoed from outside the dome, the clatter of armored boots drawing closer. Elias darted to the corner of the station and kicked aside a panel, revealing a narrow maintenance hatch, half buried in dust. "This way," he urged. Service tunnels. They crisscrossed the whole sector. The shaft was cramped, meant for drones, not tall diplomats. Elias scrambled down the ladder like he'd done 100 times before, calling up to Thorin. The alien followed, moving slower, but his presence filled the narrow tunnel nonetheless. The space was damp and claustrophobic, water dripping from corroded pipes, the smell of mildew and rust thick in the air. Emergency strips flickered weakly, painting their faces in ghostly blue. "Watch your head," Elias warned, ducking under a low conduit. Thorin stooped, his voice quieter now, but edged with respect. "You move like you were born to these tunnels." "Had to learn," Elias muttered, forcing his small legs to move faster. "When you're human out here, knowing where to hide keeps you alive." Behind them, echoes of pursuit rattled the walls mercenaries discovering their trail. Elias's stomach twisted, but he forced calm into his voice. "There's a junction up ahead. We can lose them." They pushed through the maze until they spilled into a wider chamber where 6 tunnels branched out like a starburst. Pipes hissed overhead, dripping steam, the air buzzing with pressure. Elias pointed. That way. A bolt of blue energy struck the wall beside him, showering sparks. 2 mercenaries blocked the tunnel mouth, weapons raised. Elias stumbled back, heart slamming, but Thorin moved before fear could freeze them both. The staff hissed to life once more, bathing the chamber in light. Thorin's voice was steady, almost calm. "Stay behind me." Elias obeyed, pressed against the pipes, eyes wide. The mercenaries closed in, their weapons snarling. But they faced not a broken elder, nor a frightened child, only the iron will of Thorin Bowers. His staff blurred, scattering fire, and in that moment Elias saw not just a diplomat, not even a warrior, but something else entirely. A man who chose to fight for more than himself. It ignited something inside the boy, a spark of belonging he had never known. The mercenaries faltered under the assault, and for an instant, hope burned bright in the dripping chamber. But even as Thorin pressed forward, more voices echoed down the tunnels, boots pounding, the sound of reinforcements closing in from every direction. Elias's pulse quickened. He knew these tunnels better than anyone, better even than the mercenaries who thought themselves predators here. He tugged at Thorin's arm, pointing to a narrow shaft hidden behind a cluster of pipes. "Here," the boy's voice shook, but his eyes were clear. "It's tight, but it goes straight up to the surface. They won't expect it." Thorin met his gaze, and for the first time, his solemn expression softened into something like pride. Lead the way, young human. It seems I am in your debt once again. And together, bruised, hunted, but unbroken, they climbed toward the light dot. Do you want me to carry Chapter 4 all the way to the Nexus security confrontation and rescue scene, where Elias learns who Thorin really is? Or pause here with the tunnel escape cliffhanger? The maintenance shaft spat them out into harsh daylight, blinding after the tunnel's dim glow. Elias heaved himself up first, slipping through the narrow grate and pulling hard to free it. The world above was different here, closer to Nexus City proper, where the chaotic heaps of junk gave way to organized industrial zones. The air still stank of rust and smoke, but beyond the haze, Elias could glimpse the gleaming towers that seemed to belong to another universe entirely. Thorin climbed after him, movements slower now, every breath rasping, but even battered, he carried himself with the same impossible dignity. Before either could orient themselves, the clatter of boots surrounded them. A patrol of Nexus security approached at speed, insectoid figures in burnished armor, compound eyes glinting as their weapons hummed to readiness. The leader clicked its mandibles sharply. Identify yourselves now. Elias froze. In all his years scavenging, security had only meant trouble arrest, beatings, disappearances. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. Then Thorin rose to his full height, despite the grime and torn robes. I am Thorin Veors, he declared, voice echoing with the weight of command. Chief Diplomatic Envoy to the Galactic Concord. This child is under my protection. The air shifted. The patrol exchanged quick glances, mandibles clattering in recognition of the name. Elias blinked up at him, disbelief and confusion mingling in his chest. He had thought the man a survivor, maybe some minor noble or scholar. But VORs, even in the junkyard whispers, had passed down. A name tied to wealth, to diplomacy, to power beyond imagining. And now that man was standing beside him, speaking his name like it meant something. The security leader inclined its head, weapon lowering fractionally. We have reports of armed Saurian mercenaries in this sector. Are you pursued? They are hunting me, Thorin answered calmly. They attacked this child as well. Your intervention is required immediately. Even as he spoke, figures scrambled from the shaft behind them, scaled bodies, snarling voices. The mercenaries burst into the open, weapons raised. There! One roared, pointing his blade. The air erupted in chaos. Blaster fire seared the ground, but security responded with clinical efficiency. Nets of energy and concussive pulses swept through the mercenaries. In moments, the Saurians were on their knees. Disarmed, shackled, their hisses echoing like defeated predators. Elias stood frozen in the middle of it, heart pounding, unsure if he had slipped into some dream where survival was no longer his only anchor. Thorin placed a steady hand on his small shoulder, grounding him. You've shown extraordinary courage today, the alien said quietly, his voice gentler now, and shared with me your story. I will not forget either. Elias swallowed, staring up at him. So what happens now? Thorin's amber eyes softened, though his bearing remained iron. Now, Elias, we ensure your safety. And perhaps his tone shifted, inviting. We discuss your future. Days later, Elias found himself staring at his reflection in a mirror for the first time in years. The polished walls of Vers's private transport shimmering around him. His dirty sweater had been replaced by clean tunics, his satchel by a pack filled with things he had never dared imagine owning. He felt out of place, stripped of the armor poverty had given him. But when he turned, Thorin was watching with quiet patience. Why me? Elias asked at last, suspicion fighting with fragile hope. You could have anyone. Any human child. Why pick the one from the scrap heap? Thorin leaned forward, his amber eyes unflinching. Because compassion without calculation is rare, Elias. You had nothing, yet you offered me shelter. That is a strength most of the powerful lack. And I will not allow that strength to be wasted in shadows. Elias's throat tightened. He didn't trust easily, but he wanted achingly to believe. If I come with you, Stay, he said slowly. Then others like me, other human kids, they get a chance too. Not just me. A silence followed, broken only by the thrum of the engines. Then Thorin inclined his head in solemn agreement. Then it shall be so. The VO's foundation will begin with you, Elias, but it will not end there. For the first time since the crash, Elias allowed himself to smile, small and uncertain, but real. The boy who had once slept in a rusting container now sat on the threshold of a future he could never have imagined. He didn't yet know how heavy the path would be, how conspiracies rooted in the deaths of his parents still waited in the shadows. All he knew was that a single choice, a refusal to walk past a dying stranger in the fog, had carried him from the junkyard into the orbit of destiny. That do you want me to carry? Chapter 05 fully forward into the Academy timeskip at age 15. Elias confronting prejudice and meeting Talia Noir. Or keep the focus on this moment of transition from junkyard orphan to Vers's ward. 10 years passed like the widening rings of a stone thrown into deep water. The boy who once dragged a wounded stranger through fog and rust had grown into a young man in starched formal attire. Standing before a mirror in the guest wing of the diplomatic spire, Elias tugged irritably at his high collar, blue eyes flashing with the same defiance they had carried since the junkyard, though now framed by the calm discipline of years under Vers's guardianship. I look like I'm being prepared for execution, he muttered, scowling at his reflection. From the doorway came the amused rasp of age. On the contrary, Thorin Vior said, stepping into the room, his robe's pristine, golden embroidery catching the light. Time had marked him lines deeper on his face, a slower gait, but his eyes were still the sharp amber of authority. He adjusted Elias's collar with steady hands. You are being prepared for recognition. There is a difference. Elias sighed. It's not like anyone here wants a human anyway. I'm just a charity case. Thorin's expression softened, his voice weight carrying calm certainty. You are not charity. You are proof. The reception hall below shimmered with bioluminescent banners and music that rippled across species hearing ranges. Representatives from across the galactic concord gathered, tall, scaled, feathered, luminous. Elias kept to the edge at first, his instincts still those of a scavenger avoiding notice. But eyes followed him, some curious, some calculating, others openly hostile. One pair of eyes, however, met his without judgment. Talia Noir, daughter of a Singan diplomat, her pale luminescent skin braided with strands of silver light. She approached with calm poise, smile warm rather than pitying. Governor's been speaking of your atmospheric design, she said lightly. He claims your filters saved his colony. Elias flushed, uncomfortable. I only adapted techniques I used in the junkyard. Perhaps, she said, tilting her head, but to those people you gave breath itself. Do not diminish it. In her eyes he saw not condescension, but recognition. It was a look that steadied him, but not all gazes were kind. Morton Krell, scaled and broad, the son of a powerful trade minister, cut through the crowd with a sneer. So this is the famed human project, he drawled. Vers's pet. The word burned, sharp as any blade. Elias stiffened, anger tightening his jaw, but before he could respond, Talia's cool voice cut in. Strange, Morton. Your father's own industries use 3 of those pet's patents already. Perhaps you might thank him instead of insulting him. Morton's scales darkened with humiliation, but he turned away with a hiss, muttering curses under his breath. Elias exhaled, relief and gratitude tangled. Talia's hand brushed briefly against his, a gesture casual but grounding. For the first time that night, Elias stood taller. Years later, on Proxima Colony, that quiet spark of dignity became fire. Now 20, Elias stood on the observation deck, his reflection hardened by purpose as he studied failing atmospheric processors below. Talia joined him, tablet in hand, her voice grave. Oxygen levels falling. Membranes degrading. Sabotage. Elias took the tablet, recognition flashing in his eyes. This compound, I've seen it before. It matches the explosion that killed my parents. The words fell heavy, truth and rage entwined. Together, they uncovered the conspiracy. Krell Industries orchestrating sabotage, not just to cripple Proxima, but to suppress human advancement altogether. The evidence cut like a blade through the Concord's halls. Morton Krell, bloodied and broken from defying his father, brought fragments of truth Elias could never have found alone. It was the fracture that exposed a hole in alliance of fearful elites bent on keeping humanity chained to the margins. The fallout reshaped history. The Proxima Accords were drafted, a framework forbidding the suppression of innovation, guaranteeing every species the right to develop without sabotage. On the day of the signing, the VOA's estate brimmed with dignitaries from 17 worlds. Elias, no longer the wary boy in a torn sweater, walked beside Talia, now his partner in both science and life. Their daughter clung to Thorne's hand, bioluminescent freckles glimmering, her bright blue eyes a living testament to two peoples joined. At the hall's center stood a glass case containing a small, battered scrap cart, the same Elias had once used to haul Thorne out of wreckage. It was the emblem of the VOR's foundation, a reminder that compassion without calculation had built everything around them. Thorin's voice filled the hall, still rich with command. 25 years ago, a human child with nothing chose to help a stranger. That act, given without thought of reward, is why we stand here today. His gaze sought Elias across the assembly, pride unhidden. Compassion without calculation is humanity's greatest strength. It must guide us all. Applause rippled like thunder. Elias felt Talia's hand slip into his, warm, certain. For all the grandeur of the hall, all the treaties and proclamations, he remembered only a cold night in the fog, a boy whispering, "Don't die," to a stranger on his bed. That choice, born of hunger and loneliness, yet rooted in something deeper, had grown into family, justice, and a future once unimaginable. As the Accords were sealed and history turned its page, Elias knew with absolute clarity that he had never saved a billionaire that night. He had saved himself from obscurity, from despair, from being forgotten. And in doing so, he had given humanity its voice among the stars. Would you like me to continue with an epilogue scene? Quiet, reflective garden moment where Elias explains to his daughter why the cart matters, tying the junkyard rescue back into legacy?